This week, WRN welcomes Andrew Doyle. Andrew explores why some personalities have chosen to speak out publicly against the brutal assault on women's rights, while so many others have remained silent.
Pretty controversial.
Welcome. Thank you for coming on the Zoom with us this evening. Again, this is your third for us. It's very nice. You're a very popular guest for us. And for everyone on the call, Andrew has just brought out this book, The End of Oak. It's a very large book. It's also on Audible, which I resorted to Audible after making a start on this, but I thought I'd actually be quicker getting through Audible. I have not finished it, Andrew, so please do not ask me any questions. And I've dipped in and out, and I've dipped through to the end and some chapters that look quite nice. Yeah, great book. So I'm going to kick off and say what I thought, first of all, when I looked at it, is there's no punctuation. So is this a statement or is this a question?
That's a very good observation. Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And it's good that I was interviewed by Claire Fox the other day, and the first thing she said was, just to let you know, I haven't read any of it, which was great, which was really nice and refreshing, rather than someone trying to blag it and pretend they've read the whole thing.
There's no way I could blag one of your books. Absolutely.
I wouldn't have minded. But yeah, you're right. I suppose it could have had a question mark, The End of Woke question mark, but I think that's slightly inelegant as a title. And also I quite like the implications of calling it The End of Woke, because it's not to be taken literally. It's not to be taken like a statement of, I believe everything is over, it's done and dusted, we can all go home, let's not worry about it anymore. The purpose of the title is to what I'm trying to do in the book is consider what might come next, because my argument is that the current phase of the culture war, well, we're entering a new phase. Something has shifted, something has changed, and it may be, and I think it is the case, that the worst excesses of what we've experienced over the last 15 years probably can't replicate themselves in quite the same way. And there are a few things that make me think that, and I could be wrong, and obviously it might be that this comes back with a vengeance in a whole new guise. But what I would say is too many people understand the issues that previously they didn't. We've had the Cass review, and obviously that's led to the Labour government and Wes Streeting completely changing his mind on these issues and banning puberty blockers. That's huge, and that's going to ripple out, I think, across the world, already has. And then the Supreme Court ruling, of course, that's another seismic shift. When Donald Trump was in his first few days in office and he signed that executive order saying no men in women's sports, the surveys that came out regarding that showed that 67% of Democrat voters supported Donald Trump's position on that, and even more on the Republican side. So that means that on both sides of the political aisle, there is broad support or overwhelming support for the idea of single-sex spaces. So whereas I don't think if you'd have run those polls 5-10 years ago, you would have had the same response, because I don't think people understood the nature of the problem or the size of the problem. I think it was only until we started seeing photographs of, for example, Leah Thomas, a man on the winner's podium towering over his female competitors, and similarly images of the weightlifter Laurel Hubbard, or indeed Imani Khalif, the boxer. And seeing men quite visibly in women's sports, I think seeing it seeing photographs and footage is different than hearing about it in the abstract. Mm-hmm. And I think those kind of things have changed the discussion, the nature of the discussion, to such an extent that I don't think it can go back to what it was. So the woke movement, as I see it, is now changed forever. Whether it will try and come back in another guise, which is something I know that a lot of activists try and do, because of course they're quite adept at shape-shifting and redefining words and so forth. And I suppose the argument I make in the book is that I think that the woke movement was just the latest manifestation of authoritarianism that punctuates human history from the dawn of time, and that it will always come back from one form or another, whether that's from the right or the left or wherever it might be. Just so happens that it came from, over the last 15 years, from a group who considered themselves to be left-wing. But that doesn't mean it can't come from the right. and it has done obviously in the past. So what I'm arguing for is a vigilance, I suppose. And I'm saying woke as we've known it is probably on its last legs. It might take years to die off, it might take decades, but I think its decline is now inevitable. And that's what I'm trying to imply with that title. Not to suggest that anyone should be complacent. And
Mhm.
you'll have noticed that in particular, uh, trans activists have doubled down and are becoming, I think, more ferocious
Mhm.
in their rhetoric and in their behavior. But I think that's inevitable um, because they know they're losing. And so I think I think things are changing now. And even, the other week when Lady Hale made that point about she'd been speaking to some doctors who told her that biological sex doesn't exist. Now, obviously, in the midst of the woke era, that kind of statement was commonplace from people in figures of authority. I mean, she's former president of the Supreme Court. That's a very high power position. No medical doctor should be making that claim either. And we kind of got used to people in power making these absurd statements that we all know to be false. But so it's still happening, but no one is really taking that seriously anymore. Though it does make you think, doesn't it? If Lady Hale was still in charge of the Supreme Court, what would have happened with that decision? And that's another major worry of the woke movement is that activists and the way that activists have captured institutions is my big worry. And but I do think we're now going in the right direction in terms of rectifying that. Not quickly enough,
I
but at
think
least we're doing it.
certainly needs to be some a proper investigation or understanding of how it came about and how it was able, because you use the term woke, but it kind of refers to so many different aspects of this. It's not just the gender ideology, but you touched on two things there. First of all, the understanding of people, and there was a YouGov poll out some years ago, and it said most people supported trans women. I can't remember what the questions were, but
Mm.
it was the way it was phrased, and an understanding of the general of the public that were answering that poll, and that's shifted in the one that was done. I think that Sex Matters were behind this year. That has completely shifted because people do have a much better, and I'm not saying wholly on better understanding, but on the generally. So the people like Lady Hell, these idiots that have made clearly untrue statements and but have hung their hats on it. Do they just stay forever? I mean, what do they do now? How do they come back? Do they come back?
Well,
Or are there going to be, is there going to be just a little pocket of this that are clinging on to it, going, yes, this is right, this is true?
it's so interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, the sad truth is, of course, that she's not an idiot. That I mean, she's obviously very, very intelligent. And what's scary, I think, about the ideology is that very smart people bought into it as well. And I think that's the same with any form of hysteria. And I mean, the word woke, I think, is a bit contentious, but I define it as in the book, I define it as a cultural revolution that seeks equity according to group identity through authoritarian means. And those are the two key aspects to it: is the obsession with identity and the authoritarianism. That they'll censor and bully and harass and defame and do everything they can to force people to comply. But the identity politics thing, it means that a lot of decent people go along with it. I want to live in a world where there's no racism, for instance, but I don't want to live in a world which is envisaged by the anti-racists, people like Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi, who want you to see everyone first and foremost through their skin color and secondarily through their individual characteristics. They've repackaged a kind of old-fashioned racist thinking as anti-racism. I mean, I'll give you an example. Robin DiAngelo, who wrote the book White Fragility, and this is a middle-aged white woman
Mhm.
who wrote in that book that the ideal of color blindness, that we should treat people based on the content of the character, not the color of their skin, so beautifully expressed by Martin Luther King. She says that's a form of white supremacy. Now, if you think about that for a moment, you therefore have a white woman saying that Martin Luther King is the racist. I mean, it flipped everything on its head. And of course, because she's making all the right noises and she's saying, I'm anti-racist, I want everyone to be equal. Every decent person is on board with that until you dig into it and look at what actually this means. And what it means is hyper-racialized, re-racialized, regressive attitude to humankind. So that group, what I'm saying, I suppose, is I don't think it's necessarily to do with intelligence. I think it's to do with maybe a lack of intellectual curiosity, maybe a lack of critical thought, maybe just old-fashioned hysteria, which every human being is susceptible to, getting caught up in something that you don't fully understand. In the book, I quote two different individuals who both say the same thing. I quote former Conservative Prime Minister Theresa May and actor Kathy Burke, actor and comedian. And of course, Kathy Burke, very, very left wing. Theresa May couldn't be more right wing. She's the former Conservative Prime Minister. They both say the same thing. They make the same point. They say all that woke means is being kind to people and not being racist. Therefore, I am woke. Now, those are two people who I'm sure are well-meaning, just haven't looked into what this actually means. And I think that sort of, and I quoted those two deliberately because I wanted to show this isn't about left or right.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a lot of decent. I think the activists have played on people's good natures and brought them along to the extent that they've reduced being male and female to identity categories as well, rather than biological classifications. And that means that this sanctification of identity, uh, above and beyond absolutely any other consideration, has become a kind of mania. And obviously, in the past, various groups who have been oppressed or marginalized have gathered and according to those characteristics and said we need to fight for our rights. It was important with the Black rights movement, gay rights movement, women's rights movement, all the major civil rights movements. There's a reason why identity politics can be effective up to a point. Um, but all of those various civil rights bodies understood the importance of free speech. They understood the importance of winning over hearts and minds, persuading people, not threatening people, bullying people, weaponizing the state, weaponizing the police force to get what they want. I mean, I think if Stonewall had taken that approach in the early days when they were fighting for gay rights, we wouldn't have gay rights now. People wouldn't have been brought
Yeah,
along.
sure.
What the trans activists have done and what the gender ideologues have done and what woke activists more broadly have done, whether it's Black Lives Matter or any of these other groups, is they've tried to coerce and bully and intimidate and use their cancel culture to force people into perspectives that they might not otherwise hold. I think that's unsatisfactory. And more than anything, I think it's strategically not effective. I mean, to take the example of gender ideologues, it's as though they can't see their behavior and how that comes across. You know, when they are inundating people with rape threats and death threats, and every trans parade has some placards calling for the death of J.K. Rowling or murder or torture or all sorts of horrendous stuff. So much so that those SNP politicians were photographed in front of an image of a guillotine with decapitate turfs. They didn't even notice because that is so common. You know, that to me, and now they're going after a bunny rabbit charity. I don't know if you've seen that over the last few days. There's a trans activist of dogpiling a charity that finds homes for bunnies. I mean, you couldn't. They just need a better PR, I guess. But you could like it, all that everything they do almost seems calculated to alienate public support, and it's worked. It's worked. I mean, that's why the Let Women Speak events have been so successful because it's predicated on the idea that there are individuals out there who want to silence women. And then what happens? Every time Kelly J. Keane turns up at an event, groups of men turn up to shut her up. It just completely demonstrates the point. So,
Yeah, and how many of those men are trans, and how many of them are just,
well, a lot of them are what they call allies, aren't they? A lot of them have no pretensions to a trans identity. You know, it's very
yeah.
interesting.
So who makes the rules? So who decides this is hate? This is not. You have to be kind. You have to be kind to me, but I can say what I like to
Hmm.
you. I think this is something that's really caught on, and I try and take. I was talking about cancel culture to a younger person, and I said the problem is it could be you tomorrow, all of it, because if you don't know what the rules are, if you don't know where the lines are, you could say something tomorrow,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
suddenly the whole tribe will turn against you and say that's hate speech. You're not allowed to hate. There's three things. I was taught as a child, good Presbyterian Scottish upbringing, never to say amn't. That's a bit of a Scottish thing. I'm not. Never, never to say shut up. That's lazy speak. And hate, not to use the word hate. Um,
Yeah.
why we need to get that back, because also my definition of hate, what is my probably different to yours, or the level at which you
Yeah.
dislike something enough to say hate.
I agree. I mean, one of the key arguments of my book is a defense of liberalism. And what I mean by that is old-fashioned liberalism, liberal values, freedom of speech, freedom of belief, freedom of assembly, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, individual autonomy, all of those things, but also equality before the law. And but one of the key aspects of the old-fashioned liberal mindset is accepting that we live in a plural society, and that I mean, there are lots of people on this call now at the moment on this Zoom. Most people here will agree broadly on the principles of women's rights and the importance of recognition of biological reality in order to preserve those rights. But there will be a million other things that everyone on this call will disagree on.
Yeah.
And that's healthy, that's normal. And what I've always been pushing for is a consistency when it comes to free speech, which means you don't try and shut people up if you don't agree with them, because and that includes, by the way, the people who disagree with us on this issue of gender identity.
Mhm.
Like, I think you have to be consistent and say even the people I fundamentally oppose have a right to speak. It's the liberal principle is very simple. Everyone should be able to say what they want and behave what they want and live the life they want, right up until the point where it infringes, encroaches on the rights of somebody else. It's a very elegant principle because, of course, I have no problem with people who identify however they wish and use whatever names they want. It's the point when they force others
Mhm.
or try and force others to use the language that they want them to use, or to behave in the way they want them to behave. The single sex spaces is a perfect example, because you're by asserting by trans activists asserting their rights, they are depleting the rights of someone else. But that violates the liberal principle. I didn't get into any of this stuff out of any sense of tribal politics or something. It's just that the gender identity ideology to me fundamentally violates liberal principles, which is that we live in a society with lots and lots of different people, lots of different ideas about how the world should be run, and everyone should be able to articulate that view and make their case. But ultimately, uh, you can't force other people to accept your way of life. And I would say on that point, we've seen cancel culture now coming from the right as well as the left. And I don't know if you saw, for instance, there was, after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, there was a woman who worked at Home Depot in America who tweeted something. Yeah, it was very nasty. She tweeted something about, "Oh, I wish he'd have not have missed," or something. It was unpleasant. It suggested a disregard for the sanctity of human life, all this kind of thing. And the right, someone turned up at her workplace, filmed her, was questioning her about it. That video went viral. She lost her job. That's a woman on minimum wage, a cashier in Home Depot, probably can't afford to lose her job. And you just think, okay, she said something unpleasant. She said something I wouldn't have said. Uh, so what? Like, why do you have to punish this person? And, we all say things we regret, and we all, you know, we all say things that maybe sometimes are unpopular. And so to me, the idea of cancel culture, the idea of cancellation, the idea of a retributive, public shaming, this can come from any side, and if we just applied the liberal principles consistently and said freedom of speech, freedom of conduct, right up to the point at which you take away someone else's rights, if that was applied universally, I genuinely believe all of this would go away.
Yeah,
All
well,
problems
it's a
would go
bit
away.
like he cast the first stone. I can't remember the phrase. I'm sure he is without sin.
Yeah,
We're all guilty of something. Let's face it. I mean, there's been crass things, I'm sure, in all our histories. If somebody wanted to delve deep enough, we've all said things. Some of us may have done things less popular than others, but so they've managed it very well. Certainly, looking at the trans element of this, and it is replicated in the other areas as well. But they've done terribly well. Who? What's your views about who's done it and what do they want?
so there's many theories about this, and the you could trace all of this back, I suppose. The obsession with identity, you can trace back to this kind of what they call the cultural turn in Marxist thought, which was the point at which left-wing thinkers and Marxists substituted money and the economy and class for group identity. And that's maybe part of the philosophical origins of this. That's why it's fundamentally not a Marxist movement, because a Marxist movement has to be about money, has to be about class, and I don't think this is that. I think this is a kind of strange, twisted reinvention of that template applied to something very, very different. Where it comes from, we've had this idea of the long march through the institutions, and that's definitely a factor. That was an element of it, but I don't think it's as conspiratorial as all that. I think oftentimes throughout history, ideas become popular, fashionable, and spread at a rapid rate, sometimes quite by chance. And I thought I was being heckled. And then sometimes, just by, I mean, I think in the case of this movement, one of the key accelerating factors has been intimidation. And, where it didn't take much, it just took one or two activists to infiltrate various institutions. And what you notice is you only take one or two, and then everyone else is so frightened. I mean, I've spoken to people. I had a friend who's a playwright, and he'd written a play, and the director he got him was a woke obsessive, all about group identity. And he said it was like dealing with a dangerous dog, because if you said the wrong thing, she would absolutely snap at you and get so angry and ferocious. And most people don't want those kinds of you want an easy life, don't you? And if you're at work and the HR department is sending around an email saying, make sure you announce your pronouns, make sure you do this. We're having this inclusivity training session. We're going to have an unconscious bias training set. I mean, how many of us have the energy to say, actually, I really object to that on principle? Also, because you won't get promoted next time. And then there's always those one or two activists who will scream at you and try and get you fired. And, there's the practical business of living to attend to. So I think that the intimidation element shouldn't be underestimated. The way that the activists behave online,
Mhm.
whenever anyone, I mean, this is why I always say, like, I mean, I've been dogpiled by all sorts of people. And the one thing I really object to is the abuse, because I like criticism and I like people disagreeing with me. But once someone just posts abuse or defamation at you, what that is really doing is trying to shut you up. What that is really doing is sending a message saying, this is how we treat people who dissent. And so, although people are free to post abuse, I do believe in free speech, and I'm free, and I'll just block them when they do that. My point is that there's an authoritarian instinct behind that. That's why they're doing that. Otherwise, why would you not just engage robustly, but without resorting to smears? Why can't you do that? That's
Gaining power.
Yeah, it's about exactly. And so I think that accounts for why this spread so quickly. The other thing is this has always been one of the things I say in the book is the studies by the More in Common initiative that found that this identity obsessed monomania, what we call wokeness, has only ever been embraced by a maximum of 8 to 10% of the population, even at its height, which means that it's always been deeply unpopular in the
Mm.
population at large, but also in every generation. So there's been a bit of a myth that this is just about older people failing to catch up, but the statistics tell us that's not true. It's just that younger people are less likely to speak out. I mean, I remember when I gave a talk at Gonville and Caius College in Cambridge, and it was the week after Helen Joyce had appeared there. And one of the students came up to me and she said that she'd been to the Helen Joyce talk the week before, but she had to be snuck in by her peers because she couldn't be seen by the ones chanting and banging the drums outside. So I think it's just about people keeping their heads down. It's never been popular.
There's
It's
a
always,
there's a pyramid in that, isn't there? Because there's the 8 to 10% that believe it and have pushed
Mm,
it. And then there's the silenced majority.
yeah,
That this small group have instilled so much fear
yeah,
that they're not speaking out and doing that. And then you get us at the bottom. I'm putting us at the bottom because we're the biggest crowd that say this is just utter nonsense and we're going to do it. But it's,
yeah.
the biggest one has been this bit in the middle, but that's shrinking.
Yeah, but I get it. For years now, I've had messages from people, private messages, sometimes from quite famous people saying, I really like what you say. I wish I could say it, but you understand why I can't. And I actually do understand. I
Yeah.
do. I know, like, there's a frustrating element for me. Like, sometimes I used to get annoyed and think, God, why don't you just say something? Because what you're doing is you're letting us be in the firing line while you can come up later when it's all over.
Yeah.
So there is a frustration, there is an anger there, and I do
And if
understand.
everybody spoke out now, it would be over so much
Be
more
over
quickly.
tomorrow. It'd be over immediately. I mean, like, no one's ever. There's never been support for the sterilization of kids who are gender non-conforming. That, like, it's just not a thing. It's been imposed top down by the likes of W Path, by activists within the NHS, by activists within Parliament. But they're not the majority by any means. But but it's that tough thing, isn't it? It's that tricky. Well, it takes a lot of courage, but also I've been in the privileged position of I was not. I mean, when I was a teacher, I wouldn't have been able to speak out in the way that I have. But as soon as I left that, and as soon as I was doing my own thing, I didn't have a boss. I wasn't going to get fired for
Mhm.
saying what I wanted. I wasn't in that vulnerable position. So I think it would be quite. It's all very well me saying, "Oh, why don't you just come and say it?" But I was never at risk, is what I'm saying. So I think that's the only thing I got was pretty much non-stop abuse and vitriol online. But I can deal with that. But if it was the case that I was going to get fired and never and I couldn't afford to pay my mortgage or whatever, then I would have thought twice probably.
What do you think, touching on that with your career and everything, do you think culture and the arts is going to, I mean, I kind of think that's going to be the last to come back.
Oh yeah, I'm
What
so
we say.
dismayed. Yeah, that's the thing that upsets me the most of all because of course I come from a artistic background. My background is stand-up comedy, playwriting. I used to write musical theatre. And that whole industry is so captured now to the extent that I think it would be. This is one of the reasons I'm moving to America because I think it would be kind of difficult for any of my plays to get commissioned now in the theatre industry. It's so captured that I've had a situation twice now over the past couple of years because all of the smaller theatres, certainly the smaller theatres, have gender neutral toilets now. I imagine they're kind of revising that now, but I have twice seen women complaining to staff members about the fact that they've gone into the toilet and there are men there. And that's twice. The same thing happened on two different occasions. And I remember one of the theatres, it's a small theatre in Edgware Road. What they've done is they've just changed both of the toilets to gender neutral, which means that one of them is the old men's place with urinals in, and the other one is the female one.
Yeah.
And the urinal one, you walked in and the urinals are just there. So you've got men just there urinating as you come in, so you can see it. And this woman was complaining at the bar saying, I don't want to see I know, I don't want I don't want a teenage daughter to walk into, basic stuff.
And
And it's so that that stuff is a good sign that, and also in the theaters, you often see the lanyards, you often see the almost every play is now a sermon in disguise. Almost every production of Shakespeare, they've changed it to make it about boring group identity nonsense. And like I've always said, you can do what you want with Shakespeare. You can do what you want artistically. I'm not against artistic freedom. I'm just saying everyone's doing exactly the same thing. It's so tedious,
it
and
is.
they're just doing it. I don't know if you saw the so Ian McKellen's just he's involved with this trans only 12th night production. Every member of the cast is trans or non-binary. Well, actually, as I say, they're free to do whatever they want. I'm not trying to be militant about that. I would say it's banal because every other theatre company is doing exactly the same thing. And what annoys me about it is they've got pretensions of radicalism. They think it's really daring and bold. It's not. It's boring. It's what everyone's doing. It's boring. And
And Shakespeare used to do it.
well, quite. There's that. I mean, that's the thing about Twelfth Night. It's Twelfth Night in of itself. I mean, they say it's perfect because it's all about crossing gender boundaries but it's not. Twelfth Night is about cross-dressing, transvestism, but misdirected desire. Actually, the comedy of Twelfth Night doesn't work unless you recognize that the characters are either male or female. It really doesn't. It
Yeah.
becomes completely incoherent. So actually, just on the basis of making the play work, it's not going to work. Um, but it's just it's so dull. So I think the arts is really far gone. It might not be salvageable actually in terms of the UK. or if it is, it's going to be a long, long time
I
because
think it's going to be. I think it's going to be a long, long time. But even
yeah,
the TV, it's a bit like there was a sports competition that put in a trans category, and then nobody entered. So
right,
that outside category. That's not going to happen. But also, if you look at Doctor Who, which has lost any popularity that it did. It built up really good, didn't it? And then it's
yeah.
lost it because it's preaching to the woke now. Right, I'm going to shut up because Vicky, I'm sure we've got lots of questions, so let's hear some questions from your
Yeah.
audience.
Hundreds of questions. The first questions are about the fact that many organisations are carrying on as if the Cass review and the Supreme Court judgment didn't happen. And what will it take to stop them, particularly unions, the
Yeah.
College of Policing, and organisations like the BBC? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I've made the case many times that the College of Policing ought to be scrapped because it is no longer fit for purpose. I don't think that can be reformed. I think all of the quangos and governmental departments that have been captured to a degree by activists need reform, and they need measures in place to prevent that kind of ideological capture from happening again in any direction, Uh, but I think the College of Policing is too far gone, because in 2015 they instituted these ideas of non-crime hate incidents, which I'm sure we all have some, which meant that anyone could phone up and complain about you and say that they perceived that you'd said something non-criminal but hateful against a protected characteristic, and then you would be so branded on official police records that we now know that there are 12,000 people a year being arrested for offensive speech online. Now, sure, some of that will be connected to domestic abuse, blackmail, other crimes, things that are already criminal. But a substantial proportion, thousands of those, will just be offensive speech. And as I've said, if you want to live in a free society, people are going to say really offensive things. That's part of the deal. So I think the College of Policing, which now you make a really interesting point about people ignoring it. For one thing, I found it so interesting that you have these charities and companies posting on Twitter and Facebook saying, we are going to ignore the law. We're going to break the law. They're basically doing that, which makes them the worst criminals in the world because they've now posted their intention to break the law in a public forum where it can be easily sourced and produced when the inevitable court cases come about. So in a way, we should thank them for that. But it is a feature of activists that they are so entitled that they don't believe the law applies to them. And we see this again and again. I mean, Stonewall for years have been misrepresenting the Equality Act. And as Akua Reindorf put it, they've been representing the law as they would wish it to be, not as it is. That's what activists do. The College of Policing were told twice by two different Home Secretaries to stop recording non-crime, and they carried on. And then the Court of Appeal told them that this had a chilling effect on free speech. They mustn't do it. They carried on. So activists will work around the law. There is evidence that the activists have captured or at least have a significant impact in the Crown Prosecution Service, which is why recently the CPS charged that gentleman, the half Armenian, half Kurdish man who burnt a copy of the Quran outside the Turkish consulate as a protest against Erdogan's government. The Crown Prosecution Service prosecuted him for intention to cause distress or alarm against the institution of Islam. Well, that's just a blasphemy law, and that does not exist on the statute books. The Crown Prosecution Service just made it up, and they've since been told you can't do that. They had to reword it, but they tried to make up a blasphemy law that didn't exist. That's the Crown Prosecution Service. That's not just some crazy activists online. And that's another example. That's evidence of ideological capture. When the CPS is making up laws that don't exist, it means it has a complete disregard for the law. And that's scary when the police and elements of the judiciary don't care what the law is. That's when we know things have gone way too far and something has to change. And again, with the free speech, I understand why burning a religious book is not something I would do. I don't like the idea of burning books full stop because there are too many unpleasant historical connotations there. But it was his copy of a book that he burnt in a peaceful protest. It's up to him how he disposes of his own property. We can't have blasphemy laws being reintroduced through the back door by activist captured elements of the judiciary. It's just absolutely outrageous. So that's a factor that you see again and again from activists. This is how you know when an institution's been captured, when they say they're going to flout the law. That's how you
Mm.
know. And if it was just companies and businesses, that'd be one thing, but it's not. It's the people who enforce the law who are also saying they're going to ignore the law. That's what's really, really frightening. And that's why I've been calling for some kind of free speech charter and certainly some kind of reform that deals with the activist elements. The CPS needs to be impartial. The police need to be completely impartial. They can't they can't pursue an ideological end. And until that's, I don't know how that's going to be rectified, but until it is, we won't really have a free society as far as I can see.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what do you think that the Democrats will do now?
They're not learning. That's becoming really, really apparent. When Donald Trump won, the advertisement that actuated the biggest shift in his favor was the one where, responding to Kamala Harris's claim that she supported funding the transitional surgery of prisoners. And so Donald Trump's campaign team produced an advert with the tagline, Kamala Harris is for they, them, Donald Trump is for you. The group Future Forward, which is a Democrat think tank, so not a fan of Donald Trump, they conceded that for everyone who watched that, it actuated a 2.7 shift in his favor. Now, that's the sort of shift that's seismic. That's the sort of shift that can swing an entire state. So he was elected specifically on an anti-woke mandate. He said he was going to go into power and sweep away gender ideology as part of it, DEI as another. He was voted to do that, and he did it. And the Democrats, as soon as, as I said, 67% of Democrat voters support Trump's position that men should not be in women's sports. Now, if I were a Democrat, I would be thinking, okay, well, I've got to respond to what our voter base want. But that's not, as I said, because this has always been a top-down thing by people in power who think they know better.
Mm-hmm.
Democrats seem to be persisting and seem to be carrying on just as they were, and it just means they won't get in again. And until they reckon with this, I don't think they will be re-elected unless Trump goes full down a different kind of authoritarian route, which is always possible. Like I said, this can happen from any side. But this is such a fundamental issue. That once children's safety is imperiled, I don't think people forgive that. And I think the Democrats have to reckon with it. It's going to take someone like what Wes Streeting has done in the Labour Party. It's going to take someone like that within the Democrats, and that's not AOC, that's not Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Pete Buttigieg or any of those lot. It's going to be someone else who's going to come in and I mean, one of the Democrat politicians who said that he didn't want his daughter having to play with boys in sports, and he was destroyed by his colleagues. But he's the one who's in touch with the Democrat voter base. So I don't know what they have to reckon with this. They have to do it if they want any chance whatsoever of electoral success. This is something that they're going to have to do. But then doesn't that remind us how wonderful democracy is, insofar as of course it's not perfect, and of course the majority can be wrong, but it's better than the alternative. At least the alternative is tyranny, and at least we've got a system now which is holding power to account. And at least the Democrats, if they want to be in power again, are going to have to get behind women's rights again and get behind gay rights again, and not just renege on those principles.
Yeah.
Can I ask, in the States, because we had quite a long run up to the Cass review with some exposure and whistleblowers from Tavistock, etc. Whereas America's had a lot less than that, or it's been much more contained in small places. So when you say, nobody agrees with the medicalization of children in this way, is there a general understanding, do you think, in the States that that's been going?
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think there's less understanding, absolutely. I mean, you saw when the WPATH files were leaked, in America, they didn't get anywhere near as much coverage as they should have done. And we know, for instance, by a study by the Manhattan Institute, the number of double mastectomies for children is, I mean, they're in the thousands, and I think the study suggested that up to 50 girls who are under 12 and a half. That's a shocking statistic, and I just don't think people know about it. I don't think, certainly the partisan news media in America, the left-wing news media won't report on any of that. So unless you're watching Fox News, but then if you're watching Fox News, you're going to get a completely twisted view of the other side of the argument as well. So they don't have anything which is breaking through. So it's just taking longer. And of course, you've also got the issue that Donald Trump is considered the reincarnation of Hitler by a lot of people on the left, which means that anything he supports, they will reflexively oppose,
Yeah.
even when it's in their own interests.
Yeah.
So that's not helpful. So yeah, it's a bit more complicated in America. On the other hand, at least America has now had this situation where someone is in power who is going to put a stop to this stuff. Whatever you think about Trump, and I understand he's a divisive figure, but that wouldn't have come from a Democrat administration. Those executive orders that happened. So we have to, and in our country, in the UK, we've had for years both the Conservatives and Labour fully in bed with gender identity ideology, and there was no way to vote it out. At least with Trump, there was a way to vote it out.
They've had to accept it.
Yeah. Okay, the next question is, has humour been an important force in puncturing the control of the trans cult? And do our side have the best jokes?
Yeah. Well, it's not just that. It's that the trans side doesn't have humour. That's been the key thing. I mean, you've seen the way that they go on at J.K. Rowling, and sometimes she just has a brilliant way of completely puncturing their venom by just being funny. And it's not something they can do, So, it's not just them. I think any authoritarian in history, part of being an authoritarian is losing a sense of humor completely. And so if you can retain your sense of humor, you've already got a huge advantage. And I think definitely, I think the realist, what you want to call it, the sex realist side of things, or the gender critical side, has managed on the whole to retain its sense of humor, which is a big deal. And also because so many of the propositions that the genderists are proposing are so outlandish and in a sense self-satirizing,
Yeah.
The best way to expose it is to make fun of it, I think.
Well, but it's lovely the other side, as you say, with J.K. Rowling, they don't understand it. So after the Supreme Court ruling, that picture she put out with the cigar and the whiskey on the yacht, like the great world manipulator, they just
Yeah.
They're very literal minded, aren't they? That's also why they don't like the arts.
Yeah.
Because they see it, they can't think. If you're reading a great work of fiction or watching a play by Shakespeare, and you're thinking literal mind, what does this literally say? What is the message here? Then you don't understand art. You don't get it. So and I don't think they do on the whole.
Yeah. Another question. Can you tell us what's next for you? We've heard that you're doing a writing project with Glinner. Can you tell us anything about it?
Yeah, that's a sitcom we're working on, which should. Well, I mean, we're getting on with that, and I'm hoping we can go into production this year, but I better not say too much because I don't want to jinx it, and I don't know what will quite happen. But I'm feeling very positive about it, and I guess we'll just see. We'll see where it goes, and I hope so more than anything because Graham hasn't been able to write and work in the industry for 6 years, and it's outrageous. I mean, that should never have happened for expressing opinions that pretty much everyone now accepts he was right about. Just being completely punished. Like I say, because that is an industry which is completely captured the BBC and most television commissioning companies. Less so in America, though. I think in America, if you do something that works, it can go ahead. So I don't think we're going to face any of those obstacles. I mean, if we tried to produce that over here, I think we'd have a hard time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, really good luck with all of that. Next question. Will the end of woke be different in the UK than in other parts of the Anglosphere?
So there's a really interesting thing developing, which when it comes to the free speech issue, which is key to the woke movement, because the woke always believed in shutting people up and censorship as a kind of key element to their movement. And we're now seeing in America, there's a lot of pushback against that because, of course, they have their First Amendment. And over in Europe, less so. And you saw this when JD Vance gave that talk at the Munich Security Conference, where he was saying, don't run away from your voters, stop trying to censor people for their speech, all of this. And the European leaders just couldn't see it. They couldn't understand it. So you're getting this kind of weird old world versus the new conflict opening up, almost like a Henry James novel. And at the same time, you've got Australia, which seems to be way behind, although I see that they've potentially had their Tavistock moment now. The Sal Grover case is a very good example where you have a judge ruling that sex is changeable, which of course it isn't, no matter what a judge says. Contrast that to the Supreme Court ruling, and it's quite interesting.
Mhm.
And Canada seems pretty lost to me. So I don't know. I can't predict where it's going to go, but there's a lot of interesting conflicts now opening up. Um, and Spain, for instance, I believe is a few years behind. I spoke to a Spanish journalist who said that when it comes to the culture war, they tend to be where we were a few years ago. So I think everyone's sort of, maybe it's just the case that every country has to burn through this at its own pace. Maybe that's really what it is. And so some people are going to be further ahead. In the UK, we've had obviously many, many women's rights campaigners who won't shut up, which is exactly what you need. And they've persisted. And so we are now further ahead, let's say, than other countries. And that's a good thing. And also, I think the UK is kind of setting an example for some other countries when it comes to this issue. But yeah, I think maybe that's it. I don't know, but maybe that's it, that it's just a case of each country at its own pace,
Mhm.
and hopefully eventually uh, the truth will out,
Mhm.
That would be my hope.
I think that Donald Trump's pulling of the Japanese knotweed in the States is going to have a bigger effect worldwide. I mean, there'll be international companies that will now be changing because they have to in America. They'll be doing it all over. So gradually, but I think that's one of the factors that will help pull it out the rest of the world.
Well, he said, hasn't he, that any company or foreign government that tries to censor an American citizen, and that means, of course, online speech as well. And of course, so many of those government and social media prescriptions against speech have been against gender critical speech.
Mhm.
I think, yeah, so I mean, he's not going to let people visit the US unless they deal with that. So maybe, yeah, and it's the world's biggest economy. So everyone
And
ultimately,
USAID cut, that
exactly.
that'll make an impact as well.
Might well do, but you do have to keep your eye on it though, because Trump has his authoritarian qualities
Oh, I
too.
know, I know.
And so, nothing's perfect, is it? You just have to kind of find a way through. And but I think on this issue,
I don't mind. I'll take it, and then I'll
yeah,
do the rest of Trump. Just get this done and dusted and over with, and then we
absolutely.
can figure out the rest of it.
Absolutely. And this whole culture war stuff is like, when I was on the comedy circuit years ago, all of my friends were left wing. I had no right wing friends. And
Mhm.
now I'd say most of my friends are on the right because you've discovered that it's birthed some very strange alliances, but also I've learned that left and right doesn't really mean anything. Like we're all human beings. We just have different ways of looking at the world,
And
and we have different ideas about how to make the world
I was
better.
going to say that left and right is not what it used to be.
Mm.
Not
It's,
at all.
but that's another
Yeah.
show.
Yeah. Um, Another question. Would you like to see the Brandenburg test for free speech in the UK?
100%, yeah. I mean, and that's something I've argued for a long time. So the Brandenburg test is the test for incitement to violence. And what it says is that it's based on a 1970s conviction of Clarence Brandenburg, who was a KKK leader. And since that case, it was established in US law that for incitement to violence to be proven, it had to be intended to incite violence, likely to incite violence, and that the any risk of violence was imminent. So what that really means is it's a very tight threshold. It would mean something like a very powerful political leader standing in front of a crowd and saying, whipping them up and then saying, kill that person there on the front row, and then the crowd attack. That would be the kind of thing. But Lucy Connolly, a mother tweeting from her home something very unpleasant about burning down a hotel with asylum seekers, tweeting it in the heat of the moment, very rash, very ill-judged, deleting it in a couple of hours. She now has 31 months in prison. That by no means fulfills the test for the Brandenburg case. It's nowhere close. She doesn't have any clout. There's no violence occurred as a result of that tweet, and no violence ever could have occurred as a result of that tweet. There's been enough studies into media effects theories to know that people don't just act on cue to what they read in the media. It's been debunked. That's gone. That's not even a matter of a dispute. So that tweet could not have caused violence, even if she'd intended it to. And there was certainly no imminent risk. And I think with her case, you have to put it into the context of her having lost a child because of NHS negligence. She's very, very sensitive about the death of children. These 3 little girls were stabbed to death by a psychopath in Southport. She hears these rumors that it's an asylum seeker, jumps to the wrong conclusion, posts this thing. And I don't defend the tweet, and I don't like that sort of thing, but I also don't think she should be in prison for it. And I think, because to me, the idea that the state can lock us up if we say something rash in the heat of the moment that we regret within hours, that's far more frightening to me than whatever impact her tweet might have had. I think we're getting this completely backwards. And if you say the state is allowed to lock someone up because they find something offensive, or because people have found something offensive, well, take care, because I mean the UK government's Prevent program has just put out an official document saying that those who are concerned about mass migration and how it might damage Western culture if people aren't assimilated, that's now considered terrorism, right?
Yeah,
that's a legitimate concern that a lot of people have. They're not terrorists. And so if you rebrand opinions, legitimate concerns as terrorism, far right, racism, etc., I mean, you do 2 things there. You provide cover for actual far right bigots, because if everyone's far right, then no one is. But the other thing you do is you basically empower the state to limit the parameters of what is acceptable. I mean, I interviewed a guy called he was a school chaplain, the Reverend Dr. Bernard Randall, on my show back in 2021, and then again in 2024. He was the school chaplain who went to a teacher training session where they were told to chant "smash heteronormativity." And he's a priest. Now, I don't know if you know anything about the Christian church, but heteronormativity is pretty much part of it. And he may as well have been chanting "smash Christianity," right? And he wasn't going to do it. And then he gave a sermon to the kids saying that you should be able to respectfully challenge these ideas. And that's, of course, the right message to send. Not that you dismiss ideas and be abusive about it, you respectfully challenge. And he got reported to Prevent, the anti-terrorism organization at the government. So a school chaplain gets reported as a potential terrorist for calling for respectful debate and discussion. That is so dangerous to me, this reinterpretation of words. And it may be that people post things online that I despise all the time, sometimes at me. People say horrible, horrible things. I don't want them arrested. I think that's just, it's an incredible kind of dereliction of the fundamental liberal values that underpin the society that we cherish. And so for all people might be angry about what Lucy Connolly said, remember that when that precedent is established in law, it might be that you say something that you think is innocuous, that the state decides is hateful. Remember when the Irish tried to put through the hate crime bill, they defined hatred in the draft legislation as hatred. They said hatred means hatred. Well, what does that mean? That means you have something on the statute books that a future government can say, oh, we've decided your criticism of the government is hateful, and therefore you can be arrested. It's so blinkered to simply see the tweet that Lucy Connolly posted and say, that upsets me, that's offensive, that's racist, therefore she should be in prison. And without seeing the bigger picture, which is what you are empowering there, it's far more dangerous, far more dangerous. And so, yeah, absolutely. Sorry, it's a long answer, but yes, we need the Brandenburg test immediately, basically.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to jump in now because we've got our closing minute.
Oh, okay.
You're not a difficult person to chat with, Andrew. It's
Well, that's very kind.
very easy, very lovely. So do come back again. Good luck with everything in America. Will you let us know when you've got things, exciting things to talk about and tell us about? That would be really good.
Yeah.
Before we go, apart from all the women in the Women's Rights Network, who's impressed you most in our fight against woke?
That's such a big question. There've been so many people who've taken a stand. I mean, I know it's obvious, but I do go back to J.K. Rowling because, she didn't have to do any of this. Like being the world's most famous and successful author, you could just carry on and keep your head below the parapet, and she absolutely didn't. And of course, she's too big to cancel, absolutely. So, but it must, that doesn't mean it's not horrendous to have these constant threats and constant abuse all the time. And I just think when you look around at all the other celebrities who could have said something and they didn't. And again, I understand why not, but I just admire someone who's that visible, right? Everything she says gets scrutinized, everything. So for someone in that position to stick their neck out, I just think is absolutely heroic. And and then there are others who are not so famous, not so big, who've also done it and also got it in the neck. People like Graham Linehan, people like James Dreyfus, who didn't, again, you don't have to say something, but it is the morally right thing to do.
It is.
And it's great to see. I was at James Dreyfus's play in Bath at the Theatre Royal Bath the other day.
Yeah, we're having a network outing to enrichment.
Right, because he's brilliant in it, and just watching him on stage, I just remember like thinking, he should be doing this all the time, and it's great that he's back on stage doing what he should be doing, and that's touring, by the way. That's not just in Bath, that's going around. So I would advise people to go and see that. But yeah, so people like, I think, I don't want to, obviously, a lot of this has been grassroots, has not been celebrity driven and all the rest of it. But I do have a particular regard for people who are in the public eye, who were willing to take the flack that they didn't need to take, and yeah, I guess that's what.
And you're one of them.
Oh, well, that's very kind. Although I don't consider it that way because I suppose I wasn't successful enough as a creative to have much to lose.
So it gave you a little trampoline jump up that ladder.
I mean, I'm not, do you know what? I think it's just as simple as I'm not the sort of person, it's not in my nature to keep quiet about something I am annoyed about. I think, which is why I get into trouble because I will criticize my own side as well. And I'm always told, don't do that because I'm like, I can't.
No, I
can't be like that.
No, be like that. And I think you have that in common with all these women here that we just can't stay silent about it, couldn't it? Right, we've gone over time. Thank you very much. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us, for taking time out of your very busy schedule. Good luck back in the States. We look forward to hear. Everybody on the call, thank you very, very much. Lovely to see you all. And we'll look forward to next week's, which we'll hear about in due course.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Andrew. Bye.
Bye.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and tap the bell to make sure you don't miss new content. Sign up to our newsletter at www.womensrights.network, and if you're interested in becoming a member, click on the Join Us link.